This is the spring PVCC Public Philosophy Lecture Series kickoff. So thank you all for coming out. I see a lot of familiar faces. We have students, current students, past students, members of the community, retired professors. I always love to see the retired professors coming out, current professors. So thank you all for coming and supporting philosophy. We started this series because we want philosophy to be more accessible to the community. I mean, philosophy is usually done in the university, and it's very specialized. So this is a way of opening it up so that we can have a more elevated discourse amongst ourselves. Now, some of the things that are coming up. Okay, I made this website. Don't laugh because I'm not a programmer, but this is a basic website I made called public-philosophy.com, and it is where we're posting all of the events that are happening locally. We partner with ASU West, Glendale Community College, and more recently GCU. We're looking at possibly ACU as well. So we have some events coming up that I want to tell you about. The one that's coming up next, and this is on our campus at PVCC, is the book discussion. So we have a regular philosophy club book discussion, and we're reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed this semester. And it's Dr. Noshka and myself. He teaches English at PVCC. I teach philosophy at PVCC. And we are meeting on these dates, February 15th, March 8th, March 29th, April 12th. And we're just discussing the chapters in this book. We welcome you to come. We will be meeting in the Honors Lounge on campus. If you don't know where that is, come talk to me and I can point you in the right direction. The next event that's coming up is Friday. I didn't have this one at the top, but this Friday at Arizona State University West Campus, we have Dr. Owen Anderson. He's a PVCC alumni. He talks here often in our series. He is discussing with Peter Lupu from Glendale Community College. They come from radically different positions in philosophy, and they're going to experiment with whether they can find common ground, and they're going to discuss philosophy, skepticism, and knowledge. And I promise you this will be entertaining. You should think about going. It's from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock this Friday. I don't know where VDP multipurpose room is, but I bet you can Google that and find it. And then the next PVCC public lecture will be here in KSC building. Usually our talks are in KSC, but tonight they had a special event there, so we had to meet here, but this is a good place too. We'll be in KSC 1000, and it will be Mr. Arturo Gastelum, who teaches at PVCC and around at some of the other colleges. He is going to be talking about Socrates, the exemplary teacher. And he's been doing a lot of research on this. He's very excited about the talk, so I encourage you to come out, especially since we're all fans of Socrates around here. And then Dr. Gangadine, who's here, will be giving a talk at Grand Canyon University on March 5th on the topic of faith and reason and the witness of the church. So this is a more focused discussion in the topic of reason and religion, which is a little bit of what we're talking about tonight. So I thought I would share that with you. And the information, again, is here on the flyer. So all the flyers are listed on this page, on the front page. They're not in date order, and I'm not smart enough to figure that out yet. But I was smart enough to make a master calendar. So if you want to know exactly what's happening this week, you can click on the calendar tab, and you'll see it week by week and for the whole semester, right? And we have a podcast, just to let you know. You can go to the Public Philosophy Podcast. We record these lectures, and we put them up there. And Dr. Anderson and I also have a project where he's putting up the basics of philosophy on his little series, and I'm talking about reason. And this could go on for a long time, but this is my topic of interest right now. So I'm talking about reason in that podcast. All right. But tonight we're here for Dr. Tussing's talk. Dr. Tussing has been teaching at PVCC for a number of years, philosophy and religious studies, and he is going to be talking about science and religion tonight, and I'm going to let him tell you how he got interested in this topic. But let's welcome Dr. Rod Tussing. I'm going to let you do the magic for that.
Good evening to you all. Thank you for showing up tonight. I know I had a little competition tonight, and apparently my email never made it because I didn't get a response from the president that he would postpone his talk. So here we are. Thank you for giving that up. To begin, I wanted to make a few comments. Professor Burton mentioned Dr. Owen Anderson. He was here last semester. And his talk was on the value of the humanities, taking humanities courses, or even majoring in humanities. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I just wanted to say this. I know there are a lot of students in the class, and one of the concerns with students is, I'm going to college to get a job and I need to take STEM courses. You ever heard that before? Science, technology, engineering, and math. Well, I spent nearly 30 years in STEM, in that area. I was in mechanical engineering. Guess what my bachelor's degree was in? English literature. So my point here is to tell you that you can have a humanities major and end up doing things that you never imagined you would be doing. That's kind of what happened to me. So tuck that in the back of your minds. Now, Religion and Science, the lecture title is up there. Breaking the Spell. You're probably wondering, what does that mean? Let me tell you where I got that. There's a book by Daniel Dennett. It's called Breaking the Spell. Some of you may be familiar with that. And Daniel Dennett is an eminent naturalist. He rejects the idea, he rejects all views that are not from a naturalist perspective. So that particular book, he addresses that and he calls it Breaking the Spell of the non-naturalistic views. So he would like to end those views. So I thought, I'll borrow that. So I borrowed that, Breaking the Spell. Well, I'm not going to break it the way that he did. I'm going to break it in a different way. Now, part of the reason I'm here is because of this book that happened to pop off of my computer after a lot of time working on it. And it's called Religion and Science, Deconstructing a Modern Paradigm. So I'm going to tell you what that means because you're probably puzzled by that. And let me see, it kind of looks like that. It's kind of small, but that's going to be available hopefully within the next few weeks. Now, my approach, getting back to Daniel Dennett once again, and this book, is an attempt to topple his stronghold by demolishing his foundation. That's my goal. I want to challenge that view. And here's some points that I want to make. Actually, I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Sorry about that. Those of you that are students here and you're trying to track exactly what I'm saying, I'm going to give you 3 points. So write these down. And I'm going to try to follow this carefully so as not to lose you, because I recognize I have an audience with varying backgrounds and exposures and prior knowledge and all that sort of thing. My first point, my first section, we'll call it that, is the problem. The problem as I see it, and I express it as a modern paradigm. Second point, how has this paradigm permeated Western culture? How has it manifested itself? And then thirdly, the present challenges to it. That'll be my third section. So the problem, how the problem manifests itself in terms of this paradigm, and then thirdly, the present challenges to it. My thesis for this presentation and for my book is that the two-category approach to the world's belief systems, commonly understood as religion and science, is inadequate and needs to be deconstructed and reformulated. It's time for a paradigm shift. How about that? You've probably heard of that term before. You may have noticed also that this presentation tonight is part of the PVCC Public Philosophy Lecture Series. And you're probably wondering, how do religion and science fit into this program? Well, here's how. Both categories of religion and science are constructed upon foundational beliefs that are essentially philosophical. That is, they each make judgments about the nature of the world. About the nature of the world, about the universe, about human life, about existence and what ultimately exists. So these are philosophical questions. So now, for those of you students that are following this, their first point, what is the problem? Here's the problem as I see it. Like many others in the West, I went through the public education system where I learned about the wonders of science and how the scientific method has produced the miracles of technology that so define our modern civilization. Through this method of systematically counting, weighing, and measuring data, which has characterized natural science since the 17th century, the world has been blessed with the benefits of taking dominion over it. The fruits of these efforts have produced technologies that have often been described as ingenious, with the effect of awe and wonder, and indeed considered miraculous. The achievements of science and this method for acquiring knowledge about the world have often been placed in contrast to the traditionally received authority in the West, such as the Christian church. The difference between them, of course, is that the miracles of science can be empirically verified and duplicated, and the biblical miracles cannot. As a young student, I began to see that these products of science were only one aspect of an apparent larger divide between science and what I understood to be religion. Science seemed to be offering a view of the world that was in conflict with a so-called religious view of the world. This contrast, which is often depicted as a tension between science and religion, has extended beyond just miracles and touches only the surface of the much deeper epistemological issue of knowledge versus opinion. The question then that is often raised, and was raised in my mind, is science based on knowledge and is religion based only on opinion? And this led me to an even bigger question. Can one view be rationally justified or proven and therefore claim knowledge? Can one view prove its case? This is an epistemological question and issue, and will be explored and hopefully convincingly answered. That's what I essentially do in my book. This also led me then to consider the paramount questions regarding truth and error, knowledge and opinion, faith and reason. Were these views on religion and science actually at odds with each other? Was one true and the other false, or was something else going on? How were these apparent tensions to be understood and resolved? I turned to philosophy to help me understand. So, Professor Burton, kind of the answer to your question. Philosophy tends to answer a lot of basic questions, right? So I tended towards a philosophical pursuit. What is the best way to understand this relationship between religion and science? That's what I was concerned with. And I argue in my book that the fundamental issue that divides the two views is an epistemological one. That is, those of you that are wondering about that term, that is judgments and belief about what can be known about the nature of reality at the most basic level. This knowledge is presupposed, this idea of knowledge is presupposed by both religion and science. and are not only different, but in fact contradictory. In other words, the two views, religion and science, presuppose certain beliefs that they think or understand or believe to be knowledge. The question is it in fact knowledge? It then logically follows that two belief systems with contradictory foundational beliefs about the nature of the universe are going to be at odds with each other. And that's essentially what I'm addressing in my book. It essentially, that is my book, essentially unpacks, critiques, and deconstructs the divide between these two categories of religion and science. It exposes the misleading way that the relationship has been taught, understood, and received by successive generations, which I call a modern paradigm. So what is this modern paradigm that needs to be deconstructed? Let's take a look at it here on the screen. What is the modern paradigm? Let's look at it this way. Science. Science is typically understood as, and you can all, I'm sure, relate to these, reason, facts, knowledge, objective, neutral, open-minded, focus on this world, relevant for commerce, education, and politics. That's oftentimes what how the idea of science is expressed. Religion, on the other hand, equals faith, feelings, personal values, morality, opinion, subjective, biased, narrow-minded, focus on the future world, irrelevant for commerce, education, and politics. That, in a general way, is what I'm calling the modern paradigm. I also argue that this paradigm, as presently conceived, is a fabrication of Western modernity, particularly the 18th and 19th centuries. Modernity has divided the world's belief systems in such a way that favors a naturalistic worldview, which is perceived as the rational view, against non-naturalistic worldviews that are perceived as non-rational. Modernity's development of science has defined religion to satisfy its purposes by making the two categories unavoidably related but mutually exclusive. So, as a deconstruction project, I will demonstrate how modernity has erroneously produced its particular understanding of the term religion and for what purpose. Once assessed, the ideas of science will be shown to be embedded in a belief system or worldview. A worldview that has been established on a foundational belief that cannot be rationally defended. Additionally, the present conception of religion is also unacceptable. So, as a construction project, I will offer a new approach to dividing the world's belief systems. So I will deconstruct, then reconstruct. It sounds like a fair program, right? And thus, intellectual progress through growth in knowledge and understanding will result. After many years of teaching philosophy of religion, and world religions at the college level, I say many years, of course not as many as some others of you in here, but for me it's been many years. I've become convinced that the dichotomy between a religious perspective or worldview and non-religious one is deeply seated in the Western consciousness. The religious and non-religious categories are often characterized by the religion and science model. Many students enter the classroom assuming this generally accepted divide and perceive a tension between them. They tend to insist that a scientific view is a valid and justifiable alternative to a religious view. Now, I hear this kind of a comment from time to time. I think almost every semester I hear this. I'm not religious, I'm a person of science. This kind of comment is not surprising. Because it's the popular understanding. So my response is, that's good. Can you defend that view? Have you taken a humanities course at PVCC, or maybe a philosophy course to help you understand that view? Over the last 100 years or so, religious studies have flourished in the educational institutions of the West. The idea of religion, once the exclusive domain of Christian thinkers and believers, has now expanded to include a multitude of diverse belief systems and practices. Much of the dialogue in the academy today continues to focus on questions relating to theories of religion, such as what is it, why is it, can it be defined, and how does it relate to science? Thus continuing the paradigm or the divide. While these kinds of questions may be important, I approach the topic from a different perspective. Due to the tension that has developed between the idea of religion and non-religion, particularly in light of science, the claims of science, and the idea of exclusive knowledge, a different and more clear approach is necessary. I offer an alternative scheme that provides a more plausible way to divide the world's belief systems. And as a byproduct of the discussion, I also question and challenge the validity of the term religion as it is popularly used today. That such a thing as religion in the world, however, that there is such a thing as religion in the world, however, few would deny. Everyone today, at least in the West, seems to know what religion is and what it is not. A familiar account is that religion can be best explained as a set of beliefs, rules, and practices for living. It's typically thought to be belief in a transcendent reality, one that is not part of this material world, one that is holy or sacred and makes certain things in this world holy or sacred. The idea of religion consists of performing particular rituals at particular times, and it is often thought to be a belief in a higher power, a god or gods. Additionally, the idea of religion is thought to be a set of beliefs that interpret and explain life, and by implication, the nature of ultimate reality. To believe in this type of transcendent reality and to perform the corresponding prescribed behaviors or rituals is to be religious, so the typical account goes. We in the West commonly use the term religion freely and assume that everyone knows what we are talking about. We refer to Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Buddhism, for example, as religions, and the adherents of these as those who are religious. There are the faithful, those who follow their religion more or less consciously and consistently. There are those who are somewhat religious, and of course, there are those who have no religion at all. At least that's what the claim is. The common understanding seems to be that there is religion and non-religion, religious people and non-religious people, and there are religious views and non-religious views. At what can be called the popular level, the term religion, as I just summarized, appears to be clearly understood and can be differentiated using the descriptions that I mentioned from what it is not, thus producing two separate categories, religion and non-religion. These two categories are evident in virtually every area of life. For instance, an average bookstore will have numerous book sections, including one on religion. Historians speak of religious histories, and news analysts report on the latest happenings in the religious world. Examples depicting religion as a distinct category are endless, thus establishing a type of belief paradigm, religion and non-religion, a particular way of looking at the world. And this has become the generally accepted conceptual scheme, paradigm, that I'm using that term that way. These two categories have been received by the modern Western mindset and often without much critical thought. It's considered a given. That's what a paradigm is. The idea of religion is thought to be by many scholars to be notoriously difficult to define, and it's considered to be a particular bias based on faith or belief, personal feelings, or family tradition, and is not grounded in knowledge or facts. Put simply, a religious view, it is often said, lacks verifiable evidence and proof, but nonetheless, oftentimes considered a tenable view by many. We could say that these views are fideistic, beliefs held with no proof or rational justification. Those then who would affirm a religious view would be doing so based upon their personal opinion or a blind faith and not on proof or evidence. So the argument goes. In this paradigm, is believed that only beliefs that can be empirically verified qualify for public dialogue, with all other beliefs to be considered private. In keeping with the popular understanding, the scientific view is consistently presented as the non-religious view, the neutral, publicly held view. Science is about the pursuit of neutral, brute facts obtained through the use of reason and scientific method, resulting in knowledge that can be publicly verified. The scientific view is commonly expressed as a naturalistic view, a materialistic conception of the universe, one in which only the physical, material world can be known with certainty. A non-material or spiritual realm is considered non-verifiable, and therefore not based on science. This is such a common distinction that many identify themselves with one category or the other and often feel antagonism from the other view. Critics, such as the contemporary group known as the New Atheists, express their disdain for religion and assert the need to abolish it, favoring the idea of a world without religion, a totally what is called secular world. In support of the scientific view, an immediate appeal is often made to the voices of the leading lights of science, such as physicist Stephen Hawking's authoritative statement, and I quote, "It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and to set the universe going," end quote. Or to biologist Richard Dawkins' general thesis, and I quote, "The factual premise of religion, the God hypothesis, is untenable," end quote. While many tend to be accepting of alternative views to science, some are less tolerant and have other favorite authoritative figures like Sam Harris and Victor Stenger, to whom they appeal. Science writer Sam Harris is a contributor to the perceived tension between science and religion and sees a clash between them, and expresses his disdain for religion when he says, and I quote, "Which of our present practices will appear most ridiculous from the point of view of those future generations that might yet survive the folly of the present? It's hard to imagine that our religious preoccupations will not top the list," end quote. Physicist Victor Stenger, when speaking of religion, makes a similar comment when he says, and I quote, "Faith is absurd and dangerous, and we look forward to the day, no matter how distant, when the human race finally abandons it. Reason is a noble substitute, proven by its success. Religion is an intellectual and moral sickness that cannot endure forever if we believe at all in human progress," end quote. My book identifies and responds to some of the tensions inherent in this current paradigm. How are the two categories to be understood? Clearly, there is a history that has informed and produced these two ideas that have been and continue to be examined by anthropologists, sociologists, and historians for cultural significance. Models for how to understand the historically developed relationship between science and religion have been devised, and many books have been written to explain them. These models attempt to explain the relationship in terms of spheres of knowledge and how these spheres relate to each other, if at all. This modern tension, however, has presuppositions. In my project is intended to be more than just an historical assessment. The validity of the paradigm itself will be critically examined and challenged. Differences between the ideas of science and religion at the most basic level are considered. It implements the insight of philosopher Dr. Surendra Gangadine with his axiom, and I quote, "Critical thinking is by nature presuppositional. Without the more basic in place, what comes after cannot be understood." End quote. What is meant by this is that all humans think and have beliefs about various things. These beliefs form a belief system when focusing on a particular topic. Some of the beliefs within the system are more basic than others. That is, what are considered less basic beliefs are dependent upon and are constructed upon more basic beliefs. Less basic beliefs are understood and derive their meaning in light of the beliefs that are more basic. These most basic beliefs are considered foundational and are either explicitly or implicitly believed. For example, beliefs about what so-called religion is and does presuppose a more basic belief about the nature of reality. In other words, the idea of religion and how religion is expressed is embedded in one's view of the nature and purpose of the world and how it works. The idea of religion is often thought to be about life's ultimate concerns and is understood in light of one's most basic belief about what ultimately exists. It addresses and provides answers to fundamental questions about the nature of existence. That ultimate belief then informs one regarding choices that are considered good or even the greatest good that are helpful for people to understand and achieve the purpose and goal of life, to achieve a meaningful life. The idea of religion and the concerns associated with it can be expressed in three traditional categories of philosophy. Getting back to philosophy again. It is about beliefs concerning what is, metaphysics, how that is known, epistemology, and how these beliefs are practiced in order to achieve the good for human beings, ethics. So religions are grounded and founded upon this idea of philosophy, or let me rephrase that. The idea of religion has a philosophical base. The belief held in the area of metaphysics, what ultimately exists, serves as a foundational belief and is sometimes, or oftentimes, most of the time, not understood explicitly, but is presupposed or assumed to be true. And as I just mentioned, there is a systematic order to presuppositional critical thinking, from the more basic to the less basic. All human beings have beliefs and are held more or less consciously and consistently. A quote from Dr. Gangadine again, thank you. This is the case whether the beliefs are of a so-called religious nature or of a practical nature. I address the issues through the lens of these philosophical categories, particularly epistemology, and how epistemological changes help define Western modernity and ultimately produce the idea of religion. I show how changes in what qualified as knowledge produce the dichotomy in question, the dichotomy that the issue that I'm raising, and the resultant religion-science paradigm. Now, it seems clear from my comments thus far that according to the popular understanding, science is based on reason and religion is not. This view of science has produced a perspective on the world that has come to be called technically anyway, philosophical or metaphysical naturalism, a product of Western modernity with roots in classical Greek philosophy. It is important to note here that metaphysical naturalism is distinct from methodological naturalism. That is, metaphysical naturalism functions as the more basic belief or philosophy of existence that affirms that only a material world exists, and then establishes methods that interpret all the data of science according to that basic belief. Methodological naturalism is the particular approach and set of assumptions used for gathering and understanding scientific data and presupposes metaphysical naturalism. Now, there's this notion that I want to talk about. It's called the privileged view, a privileged status. And due to the wide acceptance of naturalism, particularly in the Western Academy, the notion that naturalism qualifies as the predominant or privileged view, that is, the favorably accepted as true and therefore authoritative view of reality, that idea is pervasive. It is the basis for the favored method of inquiry by classical as well as contemporary religion theorists. As the authoritative view, scholars presuppose this idea of naturalism to study the alternative religious views and do their research in the science of religion and the phenomenology of religion. It is the function of reason and science to produce the proper understanding of alternative views that purportedly reject the authority of reason and the naturalistic view in favor a more dogmatic or fideistic tradition. Thus, even though there may be uncertainty regarding how to define religion specifically, there appears to be a general consensus on what religion is and is not. But how does one particular view attain a privileged status? There should be no doubt that the view grounded in reason and knowledge ought to be the preferred view, and as such, demand a type of privilege. There's no higher authority than reason itself. For rational human beings to use reason consistently produces integrity and results in being human in the fullest sense. Reason and consistency also produce meaning. And to use Dr. Gangadine's words, and I quote, "Persons as rational beings need meaning. Integrity as a basic form of honesty is a concern for consistency." End quote. When used properly, reason also produces knowledge, which then results in particular practices. Conversely, not to use reason consistently or to hold beliefs without proof or evidence would be to be devoid of knowledge and integrity. If privilege means that the view established is the most rational, then does naturalism qualify? That's what we're concerned with now. And to recognize this relationship, and in keeping with the principles of modernity, is to recognize that knowledge, or lack of it, has an ethical component as well. The ethical feature is evident in the famous quote by 19th century philosopher W.K. Clifford, and a significant figure of enlightened modernity. And this is what he says, and I quote, "It is wrong always everywhere for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence." End quote. He refers to this as the ethics of belief. One's beliefs must be grounded in sound reasons and arguments. They must be rationally justified. Choices ought to be grounded in knowledge and not opinion. Modernity must require rational evidence as a necessary condition for the belief expressed earlier by naturalist Hawking, Dawkins, and others. The significance of these points is that there is a necessary relationship between belief, knowledge, and practice, the categories of philosophy. Now, as there are requirements attached to having this privileged position. And as the privileged view in the Western Academy, naturalism is assumed to be true and the owner of the exclusive research methodology, which is assumed to be neutral and objective. This point is evident by the questions that are asked. And due to the stronger position, science, or rather philosophical naturalism, assumes that the category of religion arises and asks questions such as, where did religion come from? What is the nature of its origin? And why does it exist? In other words, what are the possible causes of views such as theism that reject naturalism? How and why is this possible, it is asked, for these alternative views to be believed? I sat in those courses. Those kinds of questions were asked, so I'm very familiar with this. These are the primary concerns of a naturalistic academic approach to religion theory. It assumes an authoritative role and perspective when interpreting and explaining other views. It also assumes the validity of the two categories of belief. And there is naturalism, then there are all the other alternative views. From this, it would appear that the idea of religion is any view that is contrary to naturalism. The academy is the place where critical thinking occurs or ought to occur. And I would ask, should the academy not also be examining the uncritically held presuppositions, the foundational beliefs of the privileged view? Given the perspective of naturalism, the methods of inquiry by eminent religion theorists assume that the idea of religion is somehow derived from nature by natural causes, is a thing, and is explainable just as any other object of critical investigation. So-called religious belief systems are thought to be explainable in terms of either anthropology, represented by E.B. Tylor, or psychology, Sigmund Freud, or sociology, Emil Durkheim. But in keeping with the questioning strategy, it can also be asked, where did this paradigm, this conceptual scheme, come from, and why has this type of divide come to be so readily embraced in the West? Are these categories, as presently divided, warranted, or is the divide just a thin veil for an Enlightenment ideal that gained favor in order to promote one view, naturalism, over the others? Why should naturalism not be considered just a modern social power construct? To counter these charges, naturalism will need to provide rational proof for its most basic beliefs in order to maintain its privileged role. Without the support of a sound argument, could it be legitimately asked, from whence the origin of naturalism? Why does it exist and how did it arise? If religion arises, does naturalism also arise? The answer given for the origin question depends on the perspective of the questioner and the rational soundness of the respective position. Now let's talk about definitions for just a minute. I haven't really addressed that yet. Religion scholars have struggled with this most challenging demand for definition and its place in intellectual inquiry. To grasp the essence of religion and for it to be a concept, it must have specific characteristics that all members and only members of the class religion have in common. This allows for the idea of religion to be differentiated from what it is not. It is at this point that comprehensive definitions have stumbled. Consequently, many religion scholars accept that the term is undefinable and consider it simply a collective name and opt for something like William James' view that religion, and I quote, consists in the belief that there is an unseen order and that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves thereto." End quote. The difficulty here is that this expression is so broad that it could be conceivably include all views, including naturalism. A naturalist may propose that our supreme good lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves to the unseen order inherent in natural selection and the survival of the fittest. But if that is the intention of the statement, then the dichotomy between religion and non-religion would lose its meaning and dissolve. All views could be considered then and be included in only one category, the religion category, or the non-religion category, if they're all the same. But this most likely was not James' intention at all. However, an assertion like this, when not clearly crafted, loses its intended meaning. But perhaps it is not as difficult as it may first appear, this idea of definition. On the surface, to even speak of tension and separation seems odd if religion and science are understood in a straightforward manner. For instance, in a fundamental sense, religion, as I just explained, is belief in the existence of a transcendent reality. It does not typically deny the existence of the physical world, at least in the West, but affirms a spiritual in addition to a material reality. Science, on the other hand, also in a fundamental sense, consists of counting, weighing, and measuring the data gathered by exploring the physical world. Fundamentally, it is a descriptive, and not a prescriptive process. The two appear to be complementary, as they were thought to be prior to the mid-19th century. So why the separation and or the tension? The tension arises at a different level, and in part due to the ambiguity surrounding these two terms. It exists because the meaning and significance of the terms religion and science are embedded in a larger belief system, a worldview. Worldviews provide the framework by which the data of experience and science are interpreted and explained. For meaning and significance, data needs to be interpreted. What does the data mean? Is the question. As comprehensive views of the world are formed and adherents become more consciously aware of their own beliefs, the differences between one view and another become more apparent. The terms religion and science have been transformed from their original meanings as religio, or piety, and scientia, knowledge, and have become elements of comprehensive worldviews. They have become contextualized. Religion and science, as presently understood, are separated not because they are fundamentally antithetical to each other, but because they have become embedded in and identified with worldviews that interpret and explain reality differently. It should be apparent that what is called religion consists of various belief systems that can be understood, at least minimally, by their beliefs and practices. The common characteristic at the most basic level of the diverse views called religion is that they all seek to make sense out of human experience. That is, they describe, interpret, and explain experience in order to maximize the meaning of it. And the particular beliefs that form a system are what makes that happen. It should be also clear that similarly, naturalism is also a belief system that describes, interprets, and explains the nature of a reality, along with its various ways of practice, and therefore also seeks to make sense out of human experience. The formal features, structure, and function of diverse belief systems are alike, but with different basic beliefs. That is, each belief system consists of, whether explicitly stated or uncritically presupposed, a metaphysic, an epistemology, and an ethic. For naturalistic science, the gathering of so-called neutral data does not stop there, but includes more. To use the oft-quoted phrase, all data are theory-laden. Like religion, the additional component for science, or rather philosophical naturalism, is that of interpretation. Physical data alone are inconsequential. There is no meaning, and therefore must be incorporated into a larger framework that provides a basis for which to interpret the meaning and significance of the data. So at the level of basic belief, naturalism and the idea of religion are the same. As Dr. Ganganing explains it, and I quote, "Religion is the belief or set of beliefs one uses to give meaning to one's experience. Since all give meaning to experience, all are religious." End quote. William James' attempt at definition unwittingly came to the same conclusion. All belief systems attempt to do the same thing. All of the world's diverse belief systems then qualify as religion. Whether so-called religion or naturalism, belief systems are constructed for the purpose of giving meaning to existence. This includes determining the significance and meaning of data gathered from the physical world, what is typically referred to and called science. Inherent in the respective systems are beliefs concerning the nature of ultimate reality, how that reality is known, and how life ought to be lived. Each, however, has a different starting point. Each interprets and explains in light of its most basic belief about what is ultimately real, a metaphysical judgment. Both are involved in interpretation, but affirm something different to be the most basic. Belief systems offer interpretations in the form of meta-narratives or grand stories. These grand stories explain the meaning and nature of the world and reality. Included in that interpretation is a view of the physical world and the explanation of it. Hinduism, Christianity, and Darwinian evolution are examples of meta-narratives. They all interpret. The tension can now be framed as worldview versus worldview, or theism versus philosophical naturalism. While the tension may not have been fully apparent by the mid-19th century, as modernity matured and science transformed into a worldview based on philosophical naturalism, the separation and tension between the two perspectives became more pronounced. Awareness of metaphysical differences increased. Now, this paradigm has been and continues to be challenged in two areas. Naturalism and its foundational belief that materialism is the only rational view would not go unchallenged for long. Since the end of the 19th century, at least two epistemological challenges have been put forth. Both question the foundation upon which naturalism is constructed. The first of these challenge the very idea of a foundation for knowledge and translates into what has come to be known as postmodernity. Postmodernity challenges the very idea of a foundation for knowledge. The postmodern ethos, mostly expressed in the academic disciplines of social sciences and humanities, has found itself at odds with the physical sciences, which still hold to a foundation of materialism. This tension came to a head in what is called the science wars of the 1990s. and is an ongoing issue that is yet to be resolved. The second challenge retains a foundation, but challenges naturalism's particular foundational beliefs. I'll begin by commenting on the first challenge. As the 20th century has clearly shown, naturalism has gained predominance in the Western Academy. Naturalism claimed reason and verifiable evidence to make its case. As emphasized earlier, the fundamental issue between science and so-called religion is one of epistemology. How reality is known. Knowledge is the key here. Which view can claim knowledge and therefore truth? The modern outlook was shaped by the quest for certitude, the absolutizing of the laws of nature, including reason, and the relegation of authority to the periphery. The transition from the modern era to the postmodern can be understood as an epistemological revolution, a shift away from absolute knowledge and certainty. Theologian Diogenes Allen sees the present postmodern situation as, and I quote, a massive intellectual revolution where the foundations of the modern world are collapsing and the principles forged during the Enlightenment are crumbling, end quote. This revolution began with the maturation of naturalism and was represented by the philosophical pragmatism of Charles Sanders Peirce and William James of the early 20th century, and continued through the empiricism of Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein, and finally to Willard Quine, Wilfrid Sellars, and Richard Rorty of the last half of the 20th century. Some of you philosophers in here may be familiar with some of those names, or all of those names. Their line of empirically based epistemology resulted in what is called pragmatic philosophy, a postmodern precursor which re-examined the Enlightenment's view of rationality. Pragmatism in philosophy undermined the prevailing Cartesian Lockean tradition in three crucial areas, which represented the beginnings of what is called non-foundationalism as a philosophical criticism. That is, there can be no certain foundational belief upon which to build a belief system. That's postmodernity and non-foundationalism. The first area was the rejection of Descartes' method of establishing first principles and certainty. Second, the accepted metaphysics of understanding were rejected. Neither sense experience nor ideas were considered privileged as an authoritative basis of knowing. And thirdly, the rationalist or empiricist definition of truth as an isolated correspondence between self and world was also rejected. In its place was the understanding that truth is found in a social context of meaning, shaped by the practical implications of ideas. Pragmatism. These 3 points became the basis for the skepticism and relativism of postmodernity. Postmodern thought has removed all bases for distinctions, such as the distinction between true and false, good and evil. No one view can claim to be true, right, or good. There's no rational basis for these judgments. Choices are based on intuition or feelings. For example, no sound argument is given for belief in God or belief in no God, only an appeal to like or dislike. Building on the tradition of pragmatism, Quine, Sellars, and Rorty reject foundations of certitude, whether rationally or empirically determined, as the basis for knowledge in all types of theoretical thought. Philosophy for Sellars, rather than being the discipline for determining objective truth, is, and I quote, "the reflective knowing one's way around the scheme of things," end quote. Knowledge and truth in any objective sense are not possible. Conceptual schemes framed by culturally derived sociology, psychology, economy, or history that have shaped and formulated traditions by which reality is defined is what makes up the postmodern perspective. Human reason as the primary privileged capacity, once considered able to discover knowledge of reality, has been chastened, and a more modest view of reason has emerged. In light of these 20th century conclusions, it appears that naturalism has no rational basis or proof for claiming exclusive knowledge, according to these 20th century conclusions. It cannot be proven that matter is all that exists or that it is eternal, the foundational belief of naturalism. And if nothing is clear, skepticism and nihilism then prevail. At best, it can only claim contextual, circular consistency. Naturalism, then, is only one view among many, incommensurate with all others, and unable to claim truth or privilege. Epistemological relativism, rooted in skepticism, allows all views to have their day. None can be determined to be right or wrong, true or false, good or evil. The postmodern ethos has removed, at least theoretically, the ostensible conflict between science and religion. The popular paradigm and dichotomy collapses due to lack of evidence on each side. If there is no rational proof to favor the God hypothesis, what rational proof is there then to favor the matter-only hypothesis? Why should one view be believed rather than any other? How then can naturalism justify its claim to exclusivity? The privileged view has been reduced to feelings and power. But whose feelings and whose power qualifies as the authority? Additionally, the implications of applied postmodernity can be arguably culturally detrimental. As I just noted, with no rational basis for making distinctions, then choices, whether individually or culturally, lose their meaning and significance. All perspectives on reality are of equal value. If all choices are ultimately of equal value, then they are equally meaningful. If all choices are equally meaningful, then they're all equally meaningless. How do cultures survive when faced with a relativistic, meaningless existence, when all views are believed to be of equal value? The main concern for my project then is raised again. Can naturalism's foundational belief that only material reality exists for certain be considered knowledge? According to the leading 20th century critical thinkers, it may be proposed, but cannot be considered a universal certainty. Rather, only contextualized opinions are allowed. If this is the case, how then does naturalism qualify as the privileged view? Is there any reason to believe the inherited paradigm? Now there's another challenge. Call this the second challenge. And the second challenge comes from philosophers who maintain that postmodernity and its coherentist epistemology is flawed. They argue that a foundation is necessary for knowledge, but would challenge the basic beliefs of naturalism. They would argue that the claim that matter is all that exists and has always existed cannot be rationally justified, cannot be proven, and therefore cannot claim knowledge. If knowledge is to be salvaged, then the strong challenges of naturalism and postmodernity must be overcome, beginning with the nature of reason and its ability to produce knowledge. To reconstruct a foundation for knowledge, two obstacles will need to be overcome. First, limitations placed on reason need to be removed. Reason then becomes the exclusive tool of inquiry and judgment and common ground for discourse. Second, it must be demonstrated that certainty is possible. That is, a basic belief that is non-falsifiable. If the certainty of basic beliefs can be established, then less basic beliefs can be inferentially deduced. Once these objectives are accomplished, a foundation for thought that enables distinctions to be made will then establish clarity between opposing belief systems or worldviews. First, reason's limitations. What is needed is a response to the postmodern mentality of limited or chastened reason, incapable of absolute universal judgments on a normative reality. How then is reason established as normative? To begin, reason is used by all who think to postulate everything that is thought. It can be used incorrectly, but not denied without using it. It is self-evident that we think. It is also self-evident that we use the laws of thought or logic or reason. If reason is denied, then intelligent thought ceases. Even to say that reason is limited is to make a judgment using reason. Apparently, for postmoderns, reason is capable of recognizing the idea of a transcendent reality, but not able to postulate anything meaningful about it. Reason is the only light human beings have to dispel the darkness. My first philosophy professor, Surinder Gangadine, says this about reason, and I quote, "Reason is transcendental. It is authoritative. It stands above all thinking and makes thinking possible. It cannot be questioned, for it makes questioning possible. It is self-attesting. It testifies to itself and cannot be testified to by another. It is the highest authority in the realm of human knowledge. The deliverances of prophets, poets, philosophers, and physicists must be in accord with reason." End quote. With these statements, reason is established as common ground for all who think. To be human is to use reason. Thinkers use the laws of thought. Thinkers use the laws of reason. To violate a law of thought such as the law of non-contradiction is to reduce a proposition to meaninglessness. If a proposition contains a contradiction, then it cannot be determined to be true or false. It is meaningless. The proposition must be understood before a judgment can be made. It could be said, therefore, that meaning is more basic than truth, and reason is the test for meaning, something that my first philosophy professor taught me. A belief system must not be constructed on a contradiction nor contain contradictions in order to avoid meaninglessness. Reason, then, as the test for meaning, must, therefore, be the ultimate authority in matters of knowledge and truth. But can reason produce the certainty required for a foundational basic belief? If so, then how? The first task for reason is to produce a first principle of knowledge that can be considered certain. Since all worldviews agree that reason is used and is significant, the issue of differences in where to start the reasoning process is the fundamental concern that remains to be answered. Each presupposes a different self-evident first principle or set of principles from which to begin. which one is right? 20th century postmoderns have argued that there is no determinable starting point for the reasoning process because there are no first principles that can be granted the status of certainty. There is no foundational certainty that establishes a beginning point from which inferences can be deduced. It is apparent that what is fundamentally at stake with the various belief systems is the issue regarding what ultimately exists. That is, the world as we experience it seems to be temporal, to change and to pass away. All that exists seems to be dependent upon something else for its existence. Since something continues to exist, there must then be something that exists that is self-sustaining. It does not change or pass away. Something that does not die but has life in itself. There must be something that is eternal and the cause of temporal existence. Naturalism claims that something is the material world. It claims that only matter exists and is eternal. The material world then, if eternal, would need to be self-sustaining and self-maintaining. However, two additional alternative views regarding existence and eternality need to be considered in addition to materialism. The first alternative view is that nothing exists eternally, and the second alternative is that only some that exists is eternal and some is not eternal. So this makes three options regarding existence and eternality. And it goes like this. 1, the view of naturalism, all that exists has always existed. 2, nothing has always existed. And 3, the view of theism, only some that exists has always existed. So this is an issue regarding metaphysics, existence, and basic beliefs. These options have been explained in detail by Dr. Gangadine in his work, Philosophical Foundation. All worldviews presuppose explicitly or implicitly one of these most basic beliefs about what exists ultimately: all, none, or some. To divide the world's belief systems in this way is to reveal their differences at the most basic level. The common way of dividing the world's belief systems has been to use the natural, supernatural, or even the spirit, non-spirit models as expressed by the popular paradigm. However, when discussing existence, the eternal temporal distinction is more basic than the natural, supernatural, spirit, non-spirit distinctions, and therefore more clear. But before it can be determined what is eternal, it must first be determined if it is possible to know that something is in fact eternal. Remember, postmodernity says no knowledge is possible, particularly about that which is transcendental, transcendent. Contrary to postmodern criticism, the human mind can have knowledge about what ultimately exists, and certainty can be secured at the most basic and foundational level of thought. There must, of logical necessity, be something eternal, and it can be shown to be the case. The opposite, of course, the contradiction, is that nothing is eternal. But if nothing is eternal, then what exists now would have had to have come into existence from non-existence, or nothing. And to affirm this presents a contradiction, cannot be true. With two contradictory propositions such as nothing is eternal contrasted to something is eternal, the two cannot both be true and they cannot both be false. With a contradiction, one proposition is true and the other of rational necessity is false. A rational argument is then necessary to show which is true and which is false. it can be demonstrated that nothing is eternal is logically impossible. Then its opposite, something is eternal, must of necessity be true. Now, Dr. Ganganine has gone into detail in his book regarding how that proof functions, and I also included it in mine. And of course, I referenced Dr. Ganganine's book. But I won't go into the detail right now other than to say what I've already said. It is clear, Dr. Ganganine argues that, and I quote, through the use of reason, something must be eternal. For a skeptic to doubt this is to give up reason. And to give up reason is to give up meaning and dialogue. There must be something eternal is maximally clear, since the opposite is not logically possible, end quote. Contrary to a major tenet of postmodernity, knowledge of something being ultimate can be grasped through the use of reason, as illustrated by this proof. Knowledge is possible, and it is possible at the most basic level. Existence is our most basic concept. All other beliefs are less basic and derived from our most basic belief regarding existence. We do have certainty that something must be eternal, which is our most basic concept and belief. Using reason to obtain certainty is the beginning, the first step to reconstructing a foundation for knowledge, or constructing, let me put it that way, for constructing a foundation for knowledge, a foundation for certainty. Naturalism has responded this way. When speaking of an eternal being, a being with no beginning and no end, theologians have historically used the term aseity, a being with attributes that include self-existence, self-maintenance, and independence with life in itself. Naturalists apply these same attributes to matter. Matter must be minimally self-maintaining in order to be eternal. In order for naturalism to be true, it must be demonstrated that matter is self-maintaining. Can matter be demonstrated to be self-maintaining? In other words, taking an example from cosmology, once the sun and other stars consume their fuel, can these burned out entities reconstitute themselves? This would be necessary for a material universe to sustain itself. Physicists, however, have discovered an aspect of the second law of thermodynamics that prevents this from happening. As an example, the burning of fuel constitutes an irreversible process called entropy. Representing the consensus on this, renowned British physicist and ASU professor Paul Davies states the problem this way in his book. And his book is The Mind of God, a scientific basis for a rational world. And I quote him at length here. At the heart of thermodynamics lies the second law, which forbids heat to flow spontaneously from cold to hot bodies, while allowing it to flow from hot to cold. This law is therefore not reversible. It imprints upon the universe an arrow of time, pointing the way of unidirectional change. Scientists were quick to draw the conclusion that the universe is engaged in a one-way slide toward a state of thermodynamic equilibrium. This tendency toward uniformity wherein temperatures even out and the universe settles into a stable state became known as the heat death. It represents a state of maximum molecular disorder or entropy. The fact that the universe has not yet so died, that is, it is still in a state of less than maximum entropy, implies that it cannot have endured for all eternity. End quote. It would seem that due to entropy, as Davies' statement indicates, the material world, and indeed the entire cosmos, is not self-maintaining. If it is not self-maintaining, then what enables it to continue useful existence after its heat death? What regenerates it? And more importantly, the more basic question, what caused it to exist in the first place? Naturalists have precluded any non-natural cause for the existence of the cosmos and of entropy, so must produce a natural explanation for its existence. In recognizing the inherent difficulties that entropy poses, physicists have sought an alternative approach to the issues of self-maintenance and origins. Appealing to Davies again, he offers this explanation, and I quote, "By weakening the link between cause and effect, quantum mechanics provides a subtle way for us to circumvent the origin of the universe problem. If a way can be found to permit the universe to come into existence from nothing as the result of quantum fluctuation, then no laws of physics would be violated. In other words, viewed through the eyes of a quantum physicist, the spontaneous appearance of a universe is not such a surprise, because physical objects are spontaneously appearing all the time, without well-defined causes in the quantum micro world. The quantum physicists need no more appeal to a supernatural act to bring the universe into being than to explain why a radioactive nucleus decayed when it did." End quote. While Davies, as well as others, suggests that it may be possible to explain existence from nothing without violating the laws of physics, circumventing the laws of logic may be a bit more difficult. His proposition is the same as affirming existence from non-existence, being from non-being, A from non-A, which amounts to affirming a contradiction. To affirm a contradiction is to propose that something can exist and not exist at the same time and in the same sense. The question could be asked, what then is the difference between existence and non-existence? Davies uses reason to formulate the proposition, but then denies the laws of reason, rendering it a meaningless proposition. How can a meaningless proposition be understood to be determined to be true or false? A proposition built upon a contradiction must be false. He also suggests a weakening of the link between cause and effect, and the appearance of objects without well-defined causes. It's not exactly clear what Davies is arguing here, but not knowing the cause is not no cause. Uncaused events are not logically possible, and if a law of thought is violated, then the proposition is meaningless and therefore false. Dr. Gangadine addresses this crucial issue when he says this, and I quote, "If being from non-being were possibly true, then being would be no different from non-being. If being is no different from non-being, then being is non-being, which is a contradiction. It violates the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction. Something is both A and non-A in the same respect at the same time." End quote. Another proponent of existence from non-existence is ASU theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss. In his book, A Universe from Nothing, it's a popular book. Students carry it around out at ASU all the time. A universe from nothing, and Krauss argues for why it is reasonable to believe, and I quote, that getting something from nothing is not a problem, end quote. The essential dilemma facing Krauss and others holding this view is that he asserts that what he is proposing is true and not false, but his system denies the possibility of distinctions. If existence cannot be distinguished from non-existence, a caused event indistinguishable from an uncaused event, and something indistinguishable from nothing, then how can true be distinguished from false? Meaning disintegrates and dialogue stops. Krauss touches on this when he says, quote, "Why is there something rather than nothing? Must be understood in the context of a cosmos where the meaning of these words is not what it once was. And the very distinction between something and nothing has begun to disappear, where transitions between the two in different contexts are not only common but required," end quote. While Krauss seems to recognize the logical difficulties with his shifting context, he is nonetheless arguing that it is possible for nothing to produce something, for something to come into existence out of nothing without a cause, and not just an unknown cause. He is using semantics to make his argument. If the very distinction between something and nothing has begun to disappear, then is the distinction between true and false also beginning to disappear? How can Krauss affirm his view to be true and not false? His words and distinctions are losing their meaning. Are we to maintain the distinction between true and false, but not between something and nothing? In response to this proposition, Dr. Gangadine again helps us out with these comments, and I quote, "If being could come from non-being, then there would be no distinction between being and non-being. A could then be non-A. If being could come from non-being, then there could be uncaused events. There would be no way to distinguish a caused event from an uncaused event. When basic distinctions collapse, all distinctions resting on them become meaningless," end quote. Once again, when a contradiction is the foundation of a proposition, then all intelligent dialogue ceases. A context of meaningless distinctions without differences quickly morphs into a context of nihilism. Reason as authoritative and a test for meaning is denied and is contrary to a basic claim of naturalism. And that claim by naturalism is that it is the most reasonable position. With reason denied, where do we turn? How can we know? How can we have knowledge? How can we think? All of the data of science needs interpretation, and reason provides that. Krauss's claim to a reasonable explanation of the data becomes meaningless. How can this position be believed and still maintain integrity? It cannot. If naturalism is to be considered true, then it must rationally justify its first principles. It must demonstrate that matter is all that exists and that it is eternal. This cannot be done. For matter to be eternal, it must be self-maintaining, and the law of thermodynamics, entropy, demonstrates that it is not. Naturalists have then opted for that which exists to come into existence from non-existence, which proves to be a contradiction. Existence is non-existence. A is non-A. Naturalism cannot prove its most basic belief, its foundational belief, not logically nor empirically. How then can naturalism claim knowledge and privilege? It cannot. The dichotomy between philosophical naturalism and so-called religion collapses. Categories are significant and have a place in scholarly inquiry, but not as modernity and the current paradigm have formulated them. So in conclusion, I make these comments. I presented my case that the two-category approach to the world's belief systems, commonly understood as religion and science, or the modern paradigm, is inadequate and needs to be deconstructed and reformulated. It's time for a paradigm shift. All worldviews need to be assessed at the level of their most basic belief regarding existence. All worldviews make judgments about what ultimately exists, essentially. and make judgments about what is eternal. All worldviews interpret and explain existence. All worldviews need to be judged and divided by their most basic belief, and when that is done, they do end up in two categories. That is, the universe has always existed, or the universe came into existence by a creator. Some worldviews can't rationally justify their most basic belief, such as naturalism, and therefore have no basis for claiming to be the privileged view, the view grounded in reason and knowledge. With that awareness, that realization, the modern paradigm collapses. The spell has been broken. I will close with the famous quote by Socrates: "The unexamined life is not worth living," end quote. Thank you.